Well, that was Seventh Day Slumber's new song Sky is Falling from their brand new album Found, coming out in just a few days. Welcome everybody to episode number 4 of Crossfire Mixtape, and as always, I am Sean Evans, otherwise known as Zion Tane.
And I am Eric Bouchard, otherwise known as AZ Rockslide.
And we have a bit of a different show for you today. We've got a great show ahead of us, but we've decided on a theme this week that's pretty much going to take up the whole show. And our theme this week has two possible titles. It's Rough Start or Sophomore Surprise. And the idea behind this is a band whose first album, I guess, was a little bit rough, and maybe if you had only heard that album, you wouldn't be a fan of the band. But then they came out with their sophomore release, and they just sold us on them at that point. So we're going to go through, what they started out as, and then what they ended up being, and the difference between them. And we've got some fun stuff ahead of us.
Yeah, some of these differences are dramatic. I mean,
yeah, for
one
sure.
in particular that we're both fans of, that their first album was flat out scary.
Yeah. Absolutely. So Eric, do you want to start us off?
Sure. So I'm going to kind of start out. Actually, I'm going to start out with what I would say the scariest and most radical change. Then the next one's going to be a little less radical, and the final one's going to be one that I thought their first album had some promise, but then kind of fell apart, and then their second album was much better.
Yep.
But let's go with the radical one here. Anyone who's familiar with Audio Adrenaline, and not going with the current version of Audio Adrenaline, because that's not any of the same people, and neither Sean nor I can understand why they even kept the name.
It doesn't make any sense. They're like, yeah. We could go on and on about the way Audio Adrenaline is right now. It just, yeah.
And the worst part about it is I really liked the album with Kevin Max as lead singer.
Oh, I did too. Absolutely. But it was just weird. I don't know. Let's take a bit of a detour first about Audio Adrenaline. What I first got introduced to Audio Adrenaline with their last album, not including Adios, which was basically they said, we're done. They did one more album, which was a best of with a couple of new songs. Okay. So Until the Heart Caves In was my introduction to them. And it turned out, good timing, Sean, because that's their last album. But then they came back, and I'm like, wait a minute. I thought they were gone.
They came back with almost the same lineup. Part of the reason they had stopped is that and I can't think of his name, but the original lead singer had trashed his voice.
Yes, exactly.
He could not sing anymore.
Right.
And so when they reformed, it was most of the original lineup with Kevin Max as lead singer. They released Kings and Queens, which is a phenomenal album.
Good album, absolutely.
And then yeah. The label decided to continue the name, but replace everybody with
every single person changed.
Mid-20. These kids can't be older than their mid-20s.
No, you're right. And they came out, and I'm like, this isn't even the same band. It's not the same music. It's not the same band. Not a single band member is the same. I'm like, how?
It's not that it's bad. I mean, I actually kind of like the album, but it should not have been Audio Adrenaline.
No, it's not bad, but it's also not Audio Adrenaline. Right? And it's like, don't use the name. You are not Audio Adrenaline. Even the way you sound is not what I would expect from an Audio Adrenaline.
Agreed. But let's go ahead and kind of get into this here, because Audio Adrenaline went through a pretty dramatic change.
They really did.
So their first album, which was self-titled, the kindest way to put it is they were trying way too hard to be the Beastie Boys.
That's a good point.
And trust me, when you hear the song I've chosen, which is DC-10, you will agree with that line of commentary. I mean, if this song isn't trying to be the Beastie Boys, I don't know what is. This is DC-10 by Audio Adrenaline, and listen to it for the laughs, because really that's what it is.
Wow! DC-10, yeah, fell on your head and you're laying in the ground all messy and dead. Or a Mack truck ran over you, or you suddenly die in your Sunday blue. Where you gonna go? Where you gonna go? Where you gonna go? It could happen any day. It could happen anywhere.
So a very interesting thing about this song, they actually redid it.
Oh, did they?
On Underdog, I believe it's Underdog, they've got a version of this that they did as a swing song.
Oh, okay.
And it actually works that way, because you can get away with kind of ridiculous lyrics in a swing number, and it actually, the whole chorus, they change it to like, do you know where you're gonna go? And it actually works. Well, that's a lot better than this version did. So you want to talk dramatic changes, okay? They go from that to Don't Censor Me, which was their second album, which, now, their self-titled came out in 92, Don't Censor Me came out in 93. So we're talking a year between these two albums.
Right, yeah.
And these two albums are night and day different. They changed dramatically, and the one song on everything on there sounds different, okay? Even like Don't Censor Me, a.k.a. Public School. While there was a little bit in a couple of those of that kind of rap, rock, not anything like what they were attempting to do with the first one. But probably the one that shows it off, the change the biggest, and it's also the one that was by far the early breakout hit for Audio Adrenaline is Big House. Yeah, so let's go ahead and take a listen to that. This is Big House off of Don't Censor Me, released in 1993.
I don't know where you lay your head or where you call your home. I don't know where you eat your meals or where you talk on the phone. I don't know if you got a cook, a butler, or a maid. I don't know if you got a yard with a hammock in the shade. Shelter, say a place to hide. I don't know if you live with friends and who you can confide. I don't know if you got a family, say a mom or dad. I don't know if you feel love at all, but I bet you wish you had. Come and go with me to my father's house. Come and go with me to my father's house. It's a big, big house with lots and lots of room. A big, big table with lots and lots of food. A big, big yard where we can play football. A big, big house. It's my father's house.
So when you talk about Audio Adrenaline with people who've been around the music scene for a while, for most people, this is the first song that comes to their mind. Because like I said, this was literally their breakout hit. Now, they've did a lot of others that have been very popular, too. But this is the song that really put them on the map.
Now, like I mentioned earlier, Audio Adrenaline, I was introduced to them with Until My Heart Caves In, which, in my opinion, is even more mature than the Don't Censor Me album. Like, it's just
it was a much later album.
It was a lot later, yeah, for sure. I mean, it was in the 2000s, right? Like 2007, I want to say, or something like that. But
I want to say Some Kind of Zombie is probably my favorite album of theirs.
Good to know. Good to know. Like I said, I got introduced to them very, very late, right when they decided that they were done. I'm like, oh, good. Now that I like you guys, you're going to leave. So I want to talk about one of my favorite bands, and we've spoken about them before, how they put on an amazing live show. And I'm talking about Pillar. And again, it's funny because all of the bands that I'm going to talk about are bands where I was introduced to them on their sophomore release, right? So that is my first introduction to them was their second album. And then
I wish I could say that was true with Pillar, but
so then I try to go back and listen to their previous stuff, and it's hard. It is so hard going from, their second album to their first album, which is called Above. And I'm going through this, Eric, and I'm like, okay, I'm got to pick a song off this album. None of them are really great songs.
No, there's one that's halfway decent, but
yeah, and the only one I think it has a fairly interesting tune in the chorus is Original Superman. And while the lyrics themselves are kind of silly, I guess you could put it, it's got a catchy chorus, but the rest of it, I mean, originally Pillar was trying to be like this rock rap group, like heavy metal rap is what they were trying to pull off. And it just didn't really work, But I like this song. It's, I think, one of the better songs on the album, and it's from their album Above, released in 2000, and this is Original Superman.
Used to sick,
saves the lost and died for you in case you forgot, man. Could jump a building in a single bound. I once was lost, but now I'm found. He needs no mask or cape or gown. All he needs is his holy crown. It's time for you to understand. Jesus Christ, the original Superman. He'll be your hero in the end. He is that one true super friend. Kryptonite can't slow him down. Nothing can at all. He's always there for you. He'll pick you up if you should fall. Kryptonite can't slow him down. Nothing can at all. He's always there for you. He'll pick you up if you should fall.
And you see, I was working at Borders when this album came out. And I remember, I don't remember if it was this particular song. There was one song that I'd heard and I went, yeah, this is pretty good. And then I got the album and I'm like, yeah, this is not good.
Yeah. Right? Yeah.
And then so I was talking with a customer and they said, well, have you heard the new Pillar? And I'm like, oh, I'm not that big a fan of Pillar. It's like, you listened to the first one, didn't you? Yes. You need to listen to Fireproof.
Yes.
So I bought it, and I was very glad I did.
Yes, because that is their sophomore release, released 3 years later. Fireproof is where I was introduced to them, and the title track itself is just 100%, 100 times better in and of itself than the entire album above, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And Fireproof, we mentioned last episode how it is an anthem, you know. It is a solid
Fireproof and
an
Echelon on there as well. Yeah.
So let's go ahead and play Fireproof, because you know what? I remember hearing this song live, and me and the youth that I took to the concert, we were just right into this song because all of us love it. It's a strengthening song. You want to sing it out with them. So let's go ahead and listen to Fireproof.
Here's a chance to show you how I feel. Chance for you to see it's real. See just what I feel inside and who it is that's by my side. And I will never change my mind. Try to touch me and you'll find you can't turn me, you'll turn me. No matter how you try, you can't run me. I know what I said, what happened if you try it. I know how hard and I just can't deny it. Try to tell you what you wanna be quiet. I'll never bow down if you won't buy it.
It's like night and day between
Oh,
their
yeah,
first album and
completely different.
Fireproof. I'd be right along the lines of you. If I had heard Above first, I wouldn't have been a fan of them. So I'm glad I was introduced to them with Fireproof.
And I'm glad I gave them the second chance because Fireproof was a much better album. And while they do some of the talking in that, it's a little bit more of this, like, there's a difference between trying to rap and talking through a song. And they kind of go more to talking through a
Yes.
song in this one than trying to rap with it.
Yes, and that's what makes it work better.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
And then they got rid
yeah.
of that entirely when they went into Where Do We Go From Here, their
Yes.
next album, which I
Yes.
still think is their best.
They keep getting better, honestly. Pillar keeps, they keep improving and keep growing, and that growth is evident.
So the next one we're going to move on to here, like I said, they're kind of progressing from first album was scary to first album was not scary, but not good. And I'm going back to Skillet here. Now, Skillet's first album, which was self-titled, Skillet, was just, I mean, I don't remember even really liking a song on it. What killed me, though, is that the one that got all the radio play and the one they did the video for was a song called Saturn. Now, the concept behind the song isn't bad. It's basically like he's talking with people who don't believe in Christ. And so what he's trying to say is, well, you can't see it, or I can't, there's no proof, basically. And kind of like, well, Saturn has a ring around it. I can't see it, but I know it's true.
Mm-hmm.
So the whole concept is, I can't see the rings of Saturn, but I know it's there. And then, literally, the end of the chorus, the last time through the chorus is, heaven has a ring around it. The angels sing a song over you. Heaven has a ring around you. If you don't see it, know that it's true. It's bad. And seriously, let's listen to it right now, and you'll see what I mean. It's bad.
Saturn has a ring around it. Many moons now just to
be. So if I recall correctly, this is another one you had not heard this song.
Well, here's the thing. I think I remember listening to Skillet when it released in '96, and I was not a fan of Skillet. And a friend of mine's son had the Invincible CD, and he said, "Hey, have you ever listened to Skillet?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I don't really."
Which is their third CD.
Yeah, and I said I don't really like Skillet, and he says, "Oh, here, take my CD, borrow it, and have a listen." And I got home and I listened to it, and I was sold. I was like, okay, why didn't I like these guys? And now,
well, because they were nothing like that at the time.
Exactly. You know, this is where the Skillet on Invincible is more the Skillet I know today than their release CD was.
So here's the thing. You know, I had heard the entire album, just was not impressed. Well, I don't know if you remember this. In the mid '90s, there were 3 years they came out with this album called Censor. And it was a compilation of Christian rock. And if you bought the album, not only did you get to hear a whole bunch of different Christian rock artists, but then it would come with coupons. You could actually buy the albums if you decided you liked the album. So it was something that, you know, anybody who was really into Christian music was generally buying these albums. And I remember, I want to say it was Seltzer 2. I'm listening to the tracks, and I get to this song called Locked in a Cage. I'm listening to it, and I'm like, this is really good. Who is this? I flip over the CD, and my eyes just about pop out of their sockets when I read it's Skillet. I'm like, no way. This can't be the same band, because it sounded nothing like it. It was just a real driving, real hard, just really good music with a little bit of an electronic feel to it. So that's the song I chose to play off of their second album. It's Hey You, I Love Your Soul, which came out in 1998. The song is called Locked in a Cage.
I wanna be locked in a cage. Strapped in a chair, hey, hey. I wanna be where you are. If my insanity comes, say, hey, hey. Wrapped up inside yours. I wanna break my legs in case I fall to escape. Hey, hey. Keep the hammer out of the reach. If my pounding impulse comes, hey, hey, hey. Wrapped up inside your arms, locked up inside you. Hold me down, 'cause I want to know you. You bring calm to my rage. You are life and I'm thirsting for you. Hold me, locked in a cage.
See, if I was introduced to them even on their second album, I don't think I would have liked it either. Like I
loved their second album.
I'm glad.
I absolutely loved their second album.
I'm glad I was introduced to them with Invincible, because that's the album that sold me on them.
No, I absolutely loved their second album.
So the next band I want to talk about, again, all of these are all of my favorites. The band that we introduced the episode with, Seventh Day Slumber. I was introduced to them on their album Picking Up the Pieces, which is, in essence, their second album. And we'll get into that in just a minute. Their first album, called Matthew 25, came out in 1999. And it is rough. It is a rough album. It's like they were, I don't know, just, they weren't mature musicians is the best way I can put it, you know, in all sense. Because there's even lyrically, they're kind of questionable, the lyrics, they're kind of weird. And there's some of the songs, actually, they rush the lyrics to try to make them fit the groove of the song. You know,
oh, man.
There's a couple of songs that do that, and I'm like, that's just, it's amateur.
That's not good.
No.
That's not good at all.
And the song I'm going to play is a song called What I Need. And it's just a weird song. I get what they're saying, but it's weird. They talk about, I can ask a genie to pull me through. I can ask a madman for his point of view. I can call a psychic for a well-rehearsed guess. I can call on Buddha for a walk in the dark. And it just goes on of all these other things you could do instead of calling on Jesus.
It was kind of like I was saying with Saturn.
Yes.
You can see what the point was. It just doesn't work.
But yeah, it kind of fails in its purpose. So this is Seventh-day Slumber's What I Need from Matthew 25, released in 1999.
I could ask the genie to pull me through. I could ask the madman for his point of view. I could call the psychic for a well-rehearsed guess. I could call on Buddha for a walk in the dark. I could call on Bobby, we got high from time to time. Call a politician to tell me wrong from right. I could ask my best friend to tuck me in my bed. Or I could call a suicide line with a gun to my head. Help me win this losing game. I can see my life before my eyes. Oh, and I can't stand the pain.
It's just an awkward song. You know, the whole album it just feels awkward to listen to it. But then you get to their second album, which originally released as Freedom from Human Regulations, and then they got signed to a label and re-released that album as Picking Up the Pieces. And a couple of the songs from Matthew 25 actually made it onto that re-release. The title track...
Hopefully redone.
I believe they were redone, made a little bit better. Like the title track, Matthew 25, is actually on Picking Up the Pieces. But the song that I just love, and it hits me in a personal way, every time I hear it, it actually brings me to tears. It's a song called I Know. And it comes from the lead vocalist's heart, because, for those of you who don't know the history of Seventh-day Slumber, he tried to commit suicide. And he came to Jesus in the ambulance on the way to the hospital. And so a lot of Seventh-day Slumber's ministry is to the depressed, or the people who are down and are considering suicide. It's those people they want to reach. You know, that is their ministry. And the song I Know is just so powerful. You know, it's saying, I know life can be tough sometimes. You know, and then it finishes with, oh, I'm sorry, my mind has drawn completely blank. But you know what? Let the song play for itself. This is I Know, Seventh-day Slumber from Picking Up the Pieces.
Wonder what can be so bad that it makes you want to die. I wonder what can be so tragic, makes you want to take your life. You have your Savior on the cross, while you sit on the throne. Put yourself up on that cross. Put your Savior on the throne. And I know it's hard to take what's happening. And I know life is tough sometimes. And I know
I mean, there it is. Bottom line, you are worth more than you can see. And it's such a powerful message. And, I'm not ashamed to say it, but I have suffered from depression and anxiety for 20 years. And every time I hear this song, it literally brings me to tears because it hits a chord in me, and it's an amazing song.
I didn't realize the story behind. I mean, it makes sense having listened to a fair amount of their music now, but I didn't realize the story behind, especially the lead singer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's one of the reasons they formed the band. He wanted to reach those kind of people.
Mm-hmm. No, it makes sense. That's definitely a ministry. It's not just a ministry that's worth having. It's a ministry they do very well.
Exactly.
So my final one is quite honestly one of my all-time favorite bands. I wish they were still together. I understand why they're not, and especially after listening to the These Go to 11 podcast today, where they actually had Stephen Christian, who was the lead singer for the band, on and talked with him about it. And basically it was a matter of they lost the passion for being on the road. He was, he had already missed a fair amount of time with his first child. The second one was being born. He's like, no, I want to be home for this. So I can understand why they broke up. But I was a huge fan of Anberlin. And this was an interesting band for a lot of reasons. One of them being not all the members were Christian. Now, Stephen Christian, who's the lead singer and wrote the lyrics, was. But it kind of explains why, he even talks about it on the podcast. He really saw Anberlin as a mission field, both within the band, but also as they were on tours and stuff like that. Very similar to what the discussion we had last week. This would be a band that was reaching the world, not a band that was really designed to edify the church. Doesn't mean the church couldn't be edified by their music. I definitely was.
Yeah, I was reading up about them today, and they are what we described as it's a band that consists of Christian members, but it is not a Christian band.
Right. But you listen to you look at their lyrics, which a lot of them deal with relationships and stuff like that, but there's a very definite, when you start to dig into the lyrics, you see the Christian influence in them heavily.
Oh yeah, for sure.
So their first album wasn't horrible. Blueprints for the Black Market actually has a couple of really good songs on it. The very first song on it, Ready Feels, is good. And then they have a song on there called Glass to the Arson that is one of my all-time favorite songs of theirs. It's just amazing. But the rest of the album's really pretty blah, including, and then there's one song in particular that just rattles my cage every time I hear it. I can't stand the song. And of course, I only got to see Anberlin live once, and it was after the release of Blueprints, so I didn't get to hear it, At the time, I got to go free. I was going with some friends of mine who were big fans, so it was just kind of like, okay. And of course, they played this song, and I'm just sitting there going, oh, no, please. So the song is called Speak in Foreign Language. Well, actually, it's just called Foreign Language. Give it a listen. We'll talk a little bit about it, but you'll kind of see why I cringe when this song plays.
Boys speak in rhythm and girls in code. Do-do-do-do. Tell it to me straight. Give it to me now. Face forward. Face forward. Boys speak in rhythm and girls in code. Tell it to me straight. Give it to me now. Face forward. Face forward. Speaking foreign language. Nothing I can translate. You're speaking foreign language. Nothing I can dictate. You're speaking foreign language.
So I understand what they're trying to say with this song. They're kind of dealing with the whole thing, boys and girls not understanding each other when they talk to each other, especially because they're so radically different. But I mean, come on, boys speak in rhythm and girls in code, and then like the second verse, it's boys speak in rhythm and girls just lie.
Yeah.
And it's just like,
What? Okay, I was listening to them like, what?
yeah,
I mean,
it's just not good.
Now, rhythmically and musically, It's not a terrible song.
No.
But lyrically, it's like, what?
Mm-hmm. But like I said, especially because of Ready Fuels and Glass to the Arson, it was one of these that I was sitting here going, well, I'm going to pay attention to this band because they've got potential. I want to see if they can do anything with it. So when I was the manager at the Christian bookstore, that was, by the way, Blueprints for the Black Market came out in 2003. When I was working at the Christian bookstore as a music manager, there was this Christian satellite network, and like most satellite, it was on Dish Network, I think. And like most satellite things, they had, some video channels. Like they had one that was contemporary. They had one that was much more rock, which we tended to have on a fair amount. And then they also had radio stations that you could tune into, and one of them was more rock. And I think the first time I heard it was on the radio station, then I saw the video for it. But I started hearing songs off of Never Take Friendship Personal, which was the second album that Anberlin did. Came out in 2005. And the first song I heard was called Paper Thin Hymn. Holy cow, is this a good song. And part of the reason I love Anberlin so much, Stephen Christian, more than probably the overwhelming majority of singers that I know, is so good at putting his emotion into his voice. And as you go into the build up to the chorus of this song, he goes, the chorus of the song is, who's going to call on Sunday morning? Who's going to drive you home? I just want one more chance to put my arms in fragile hands. And when he hits that, the emotion in his voice is just, it almost brings you to tears. He's talking about loss, about getting ready to lose someone. And it's just, it is a powerful song. Mm-hmm. So we're going to go ahead and listen to Paper Thin Hymn.
When you're with friends are hotel rooms, hands are distant lullabies. If I couldn't turn around, I would tonight. These roads never seem so long. Central paper hearts stop beating, leaving me suddenly alone. Will daybreak ever come? Who's gonna call on Sunday morning? Who's gonna drive you home? I just want one more chance. Don't put my arms in fragile hands. I thought you said forever, over and over. A sleepless night becomes bitter oblivion. Things must roll through my head over and over. Complaints of violence become my only friend.
So yeah, this song convinced me I needed to pick up Never Take Friendship Personal. And then the very first song on it is the title track, Never Take Friendship Personal. And I was just like, yep, okay, this is the band I've been wanting to hear. The rest of the album is just amazing.
Yeah.
Filled with phenomenal songs. And it also has the first version of the song we're going to close the show out with. Now, I'm not using that version because they redid it on New Surrender, and I feel the version on New Surrender is better and has just an absolutely iconic guitar riff to start things out. We will get to that later.
All right, well, let me move on to my final one first. I'm going to talk about Foot Krutch, an Ontario legend from my home province of Ontario. And again, I was introduced to them on their second album, which is phenomenal. But I went back and I tried, after becoming a fan of theirs, I went back and I bought their first album called Set It Off.
Big mistake.
It was called Set It Off. Now, there is a caveat to these guys, because Set It Off isn't actually their first album. It is their first commercially available album. Okay, so they had two independent releases that they did themselves. The first called Shutterbug in 2000. No, That's What People Do in 97. I must have typed this wrong. I think 95. Sorry, 1995 was Shutterbug, and then 97 was That's What People Do. But Set It Off was, in 2000, was their first commercially available album after they were signed to a label. And believe me, this is yet another album of just awkwardness.
There is one good song on the album.
Which one do you say is good?
It's the only one they still do live, which is Puppet.
Okay. Well, last night I was sitting down, and my daughter loves Foot Krutch as well. And I said, I put a song on. This was the title track, Set It Off, which is literally just a rap song. Like, it's It's not even rock and roll. It's not heavy metal. It's like your standard hip hop song. And I'm like, Aria, do you recognize the vocalist? She's like, not really. I said, it's Thousand Foot Krutch. And she's like, oh, that's just, I feel sorry for them. She says, I feel really bad for them. Listening to that song, But the song,
it's Trevor, but it's not good Trevor.
No. See, their whole first album, they're trying too hard to be heavy metal hip hop, and
it was kind of the style that was starting to become popular in that time.
Pillar did the same thing.
And POD was doing that. There were bands that were doing that kind of thing. The problem is there were very few bands that could do it well,
and POD was one of them.
Bands.
Yeah. Yes, POD did it well. Pillar and Thousand Foot Krutch
moved away from it.
Yes, I know. Yeah. So the song I want to introduce to you from Set It Off is a song that I, again, will describe as awkward. It's called Up Comes Down. And the reason I say it's awkward is because there are at least 4 different tunes and beats in this one song. And it just keeps changing. As soon as you get into one beat, all of a sudden they change it up and it's slow. And then they change it up and it's medium. And then it's super fast again. And then it's, and then they stop it and then they start slow again. It's like, what are you trying to do with this song?
Right. And now some people are going to argue, well, doesn't Thousand Foot Krutch kind of do that now? The difference is they've learned, and when they do change it, they've learned how to transition well.
Yeah, there are no transitions in this. And that's probably why it feels awkward. It's a straight cut from one musical style to another, and it's hard to listen to, So we're going to go ahead and listen to it, and you can hear the driving beat right now, but when it starts, listen to how it changes, and it changes at least 3 times in what we're going to have you listen to right now. This is Up Comes Down from their album Set It Off in 2000. My daughter was even cringing listening to this song when he starts even singing really slow. And she's like, that's just weird. It's like, I'm waiting for him to say something and he's taking too long to say it. It's just...
Like I said, the only song, in my opinion, that's worth having off of Set It Off, and since you can buy songs digitally now so you can just get the one song, is Puppet. The rest of that album can be ignored.
But you'd have to go, just if you're a fan of Thousand Foot Krutch, go back and listen to Set It Off, because I believe you will cringe as well.
Oh, yeah. Well, assuming, and I'm pretty sure you will be able to find these songs on YouTube. We do have a YouTube channel now, and we're putting together playlists for each episode. So the songs that we feature on the episodes will be on there. And yeah, you'll get a chance to hear the entire, if you really want to, you'll get a chance to hear the entire song.
Yeah, exactly. So finally, I'm going to finish off Thousand Foot Krutch with their second album, Phenomenon, and specifically the title track, Phenomenon, because this album...
Oh, you're not doing Rock Fist?
No, I'm not doing Rock Fist.
That song was so overplayed. It's fun. I still enjoy it, but it was so overplayed.
But Phenomenon is what sold me on this band, because that is the first song I heard of them, And the song itself is such a 100 or 360 degree, no, I'm going to say 180. That's the word I'm looking for. It's a complete 180 from Set It Off. Phenomenon is really what started them down the path to the great band they are now. And they've had hit after hit. Like they've had every album, I think, personally, Thousand Foot Krutch just hits it out of the park every time. you know.
I mean, and Phenomenon still has a couple rough edges on it. Like, This Is a Call is not a good song. And I was so glad when their next album, The Art of Breaking, came out, because I'm sitting here listening. I can't remember which one it is, but the slow song on there, I'm like, they finally learned how to do a slow song.
Right? The Art of Breaking is amazing. You need to listen to that album. That's the third album. But Phenomenon, this is really what set them down the road of greatness.
Absolutely.
You know? This is the album where they started to actually realize who they are. So let's go ahead and listen to Phenomenon.
If you like us, come and write us, roll up beside us, no place to hide us. All freedom fighters, let's unite us, switch on your nitrous and let's go. Destination for navigation, man up your stations, feel the sensation. Surround invasion with communication, move quick, we might avoid contamination. Down, it comes the sound, everyone down, your feet to this phenomenon now. Let's make it loud and show them all how you move to this phenomenon. Roll, open your soul, baby, lose control inside to this phenomenon. Just let yourself go and let everyone know you move to this phenomenon.
And I'm glad they finally realized who they are, because I love these guys.
Yeah. This is one of those songs that sticks with you. You hear it, and then like you're walking around, and it just starts playing in your head. Thousand Foot Krutch is infamous for that. A lot of their songs, Move, the Untraveled Road that we played last week.
Yes.
Oh,
Born This Way,
Courtesy Call. So many of their songs, once it starts, it just you walk away humming that song for the next 5 days.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's fantastic. Love these guys. Just, listen to Set It Off for fun, but don't take it seriously because it's not a good album. Start with Phenomenon and move forward from there.
So it's kind of interesting that we've, this topic this week, because I think for a lot of bands, you end up with the exact opposite of this.
Mm-hmm.
Their first album is really good, and then their second album, and I think because a lot of why it happens is, if you think about it, for these bands, their first album generally are songs that they've been working on for years.
Yep.
So by the time they actually get that break and get to release that first album, they've polished them and they've played them, and they've poured their heart and soul into these songs for a lot of times 5-6 years or more. And then all of a sudden, within a couple of years, they're expected to come out with a second album, and they're not used to the concept of having to turn out songs that quickly.
Right.
And so you end up with a list. And so it's interesting to see groups like this and unfortunately, you're not going to see as much of this nowadays, because if your first album doesn't do well, a label's going to drop you.
Yeah, exactly. Much like television these days, it's like you need to hit it out of the park immediately or you're gone. How
many times have we seen a TV show that it took like half a season or more before everything started to fall into place, but because it took half a season or more,
they got canceled.
By the time it starts to get good, the network drops them.
Yep.
Well, you have kind of the same thing happen with bands nowadays. If that first album doesn't do at least decently, doesn't matter that you've signed a 3-album contract. They'll drop you after that first one.
Yeah, exactly. And, and we've seen this over several times already. Every episode we've done a one-hit wonder, a one-shot wonder.
Mm-hmm.
And these are bands that came out with one album, hit it out of the park, and then we never heard from them again. So there's definitely a lot of bands that hit it out of the park. And, I think we should definitely do an episode where we talk about those kind of bands that, first album, it was just incredible, and they never slowed down. Now I'm talking
for a fact Red is going to be on that list.
Red, their first album was incredible. Like, I was in love with those guys from second one of their first song. You know what I mean? It's just, wow, these guys are amazing, and they still are. But that pretty much brings us to the end of this episode. I hope you enjoyed this interesting topic. Send us some feedback and tell us what are some of the bands that you learned to love after their first album. What bands do you listen to where their first album isn't as good as their sophomore release? So, of course, you can always follow us. I am on Twitter and pretty much online everywhere as Ziantane, and that is Xiantayne.
And I am pretty much everywhere as AZ Rockslide. You can also, of course, listen to me on the Everyday Gamers podcast. We just released our latest one, and this is a bit of a different podcast for us because we decided to get, in light of the lead singer of Linkin Park's suicide and Chris Cornell's earlier in the year and all that, we decided just to get into an episode where we were kind of real and honest with some struggles that we all have.
Excellent.
And I think it turned out to be a really good episode. I'm very interested in hearing people's responses. Not as much interested in hearing what they think about what we have to share, but what we're hoping to kind of encourage and what we did with this is getting other people to share like their struggles and that, because when you see so many situations like this one where people are just, they get to a point where, and people are looking back at some interviews that, I can't think of his name, but the lead singer from Linkin Park, they were looking back at some interviews that he did like a few days before this and realizing it was basically a call for help. And we're just kind of trying to say, look, we're here. We're going to be transparent about some of the stuff we struggle with. And please, if you have problems, reach out to us, to someone.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
All right, you can follow this show on Twitter at CrossfireMix. You can send that feedbacks to crossfiremixtape@gmail.com and check out our YouTube channel. We've created a bit.ly for it, so bit.ly/crossfiremixtape will get you to our YouTube channel. And that is it for this week's episode. Eric, why don't you send us off?
So as I mentioned earlier, I'm using another song from Anberlin. This is my favorite song of theirs, and because of the way we normally bring the songs in, you may not get to hear the guitar intro for this. It's iconic, though. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if you've heard it used several different places. I know that for a little while in the Phoenix Suns post-game show, they were using it. The song is called Feel Good Drag. This song is really upfront about sexual temptation. And it's basically a situation where this gal is trying to seduce this guy, and apparently he's made mistakes with her in the past, and he's like, no, I'm not doing this again. And that's what the entire point of the song. It is powerful. The video for it is kind of frightening, but the imagery is taken, especially since I just got through Proverbs. Some of the imagery is taken like straight out of that. So it is a very powerful song, and I like this version off of New Surrender in 2008. The version that's on Never Take Friendship Personal is good, but this version on New Surrender is better, and so that's the reason I chose it. So we're going to go ahead and close the show out with Anberlin's Feel Good Drag. We will catch you next time on Crossfire Mixtape.
I'm here for you, she said, and we can stay for a while. My boyfriend's gone. We can just pretend. Lips that need no introduction. Now who's the greatest in your trap I seem to invite? Tell me, darling, where do we